Newcastle United have dropped points in yet another game that they had no business not winning. Is this the beginning of the end of Eddie Howe's tenure at Newcastle United, or should we give him a little bit more time? Let's talk about it a little bit more, shall we? Hello, everybody, and welcome out to the Newcastle United Digest. My name is Adam Snyder, and I will be delivering you some more Toon content in a bite-sized chunk. And this episode will be all about Newcastle's 1-1 draw at Crystal Palace on Saturday. I'll be talking about my analysis of both first and second half, my ratings by position, and do I really think that Eddie Howe's demise has gone another layer deeper? Let's talk about it right now. First half was dominated by scrappy play from both sides, but it was Newcastle that was really seeing the brunt of it. You saw a lot of fouls going both ways, but it led to a lot of Newcastle players hitting the deck. Willock was down several times, Joelinton was down twice, and Alexander Isak was battered bad enough to get taken off early in the half. One of my biggest concerns with this game was getting burned on the counterattack by Crystal Palace. Reason I said that on Friday is because, well, it's the only weapon they have to score goals right now. And it was right there for the taking because they nearly got one. We coughed up the ball on a corner kick and they went off to the races. Munoz had a wide open goal after making the perfect run down the left-hand side, and he could not convert. He put the ball wide, and I could not believe it. Everybody I was watching along with on my group chats, they couldn't believe it. Everybody at Selhurst Park, even in the away end, they couldn't believe it either. That was such a glaring miss that it really should have been 1-0 Palace at that point. One of the things I talked about on Friday was how to beat Palace, and it involved stretching out their back three and playing some give and goes on the outside to isolate the midfielders and stretch out that back three even more. When you do this, you get the ability to make runs down the channel, you get runs to the end line, and allow for some cutbacks right in the middle of the box. None of these things happened. Or the other option is take them head on. Just take the attack by the scruff of the neck, go right down the middle, and really allow them to come to you and create space. This didn't happen either. We played the same way that we did against West Ham and invited a whole bunch of men behind the ball and invited us to break down. Because we played the same way against West Ham, against Crystal Palace, they knew exactly how to set up against us, and the same result was achieved. We didn't win the game. In the second half, scrappy play continued yet again, but we used it to our advantage. We kept getting ourselves in more dangerous offensive setups, and Palace couldn't help but concede fouls in very, very dangerous places. Eventually, we converted on one with Gahey tapping in an Anthony Gordon pass from the end line. If only he was wearing a Newcastle shirt instead. The other thing that I really was worried about was Eddie Howe getting his subs wrong, and he did it yet again. Instead of bringing on Callum Wilson for Isak, he brought on Harvey Barnes. This was telling that Wilson was not quite ready to play more than 20 or 30 minutes of football. But that's fine. But why not bring in Will Osula instead, who is a much bigger forward that could be a like for like, at least size-wise, for Alexander Isak? And then when Wilson was brought on, he subbed on for Anthony Gordon. That's a little strange, too. The time you had Barnes on one side, Joelinton on the other, and Gordon up the middle. Why not keep Gordon on, take off Joelinton, and bring in Callum Wilson for size up front? That makes a lot more sense to me, and you have a lot more pace on the side. Makes more sense to me. The other sub that happened was Sean Longstaff for Joe Willock. I was okay with this, especially with the question about Willock's fitness from the West Ham game on Monday. I'm okay with that one. What I'm not okay with was when the sub was made, as well as the Wilson sub. These were both made in the 75th minute, giving them 15 minutes or so plus stoppage time to make an impact on this game. when really the momentum was lost 10 minutes prior to that. And that's when the sub should have been made, not after we've hit a wall. And then we have Palace's equalizer. Palace did what I thought we would do to them, which was they stretched out our defense and found space in the seams. They were able to make a very effective switch, finding a mismatch between Joelinton and Munoz because Joelinton had switched off. Munoz was able to take what, 2, 3, 4 steps in a really good leap to get a lot of power behind his header. Because of the game mismanagement, you had a Joelinton who was a passenger this entire game, switching off when it mattered the most, and it cost us 2 points. And now let's move on to ratings by position. And we're going to start with the goalkeeper like we always do. And Nick Pope is going to get an 8 out of 10 for this game. Pope did well to keep us in this game for as long as he did. Even though Munoz's header on the equalizer was a bullet, he did get a hand on it. I know that the goalkeeper's philosophy is if you get a hand on it, you can do more to save it. I'm sure he'll want that one back in hindsight for that reason. Defense is going to get a 7 out of 10. They were bent a little bit, but they didn't break for most of this game. The distribution was also much better compared to the West Ham match last Monday, and Dan Burn came up with a massive save in the second half to keep it at 1-0. This pains me to say this, but I have to give the midfield a 4 out of 10 for this game. And the reason I say it pains me to do this is because Sandro Tonali was absolutely class the entire game. He showed what he could do, and he showed everybody just why he should be in the starting 11 going forward. He was able to make some very effective and very almost nonchalant looking one-touch passes that were massive at relieving pressure when it was really needed. And he was able to make almost no-look passes and services into the penalty area that nobody was really expecting, but were so dangerous that if somebody gets their foot on it, it's a good goal and it's an absolute worldie. Unfortunately, nobody was looking for it. I've mentioned this before, but one of the other reasons why I give the midfield a 4 out of 10 was Joelinton's performance, because he was a passenger and very anonymous this entire game. He brought nothing going forward. And of course, he is directly at fault for missing Munoz's streaking run on the goal that Palace scored late in the second half. Midfield is not all at fault, though, and I'm giving the forwards the lowest score I've given a position this season, I believe, and that's a 1 out of 10. And that 1 is for the one shot attempt they had that was blocked. It's tough to lose Alexander Isak so early, I get it, but nobody stepped up to fill his place. We had collectively 0 shots on goal because the own goal doesn't count as a shot on goal for us. And that plus the 0.02 XG stat that we had for this game are the most damning statistics I have seen for a game that we've played this season. Set pieces, I'm going to give an 8 out of 10. And I was going to give this originally a 9, but I docked it down a point because in the first half, we coughed up the ball on a corner kick, and that led to Palace's counterattack that was the most dangerous one of the first half, where Munoz completely missed the goal when he should have absolutely buried it. And our only goal came off of a set piece. It was a very well executed pass right down the seam. Gordon is able to get to the end line and just put it right across the goal line in danger. And if Gahey doesn't get to it, then we have, I think, 2 or 3 white shirts there to tap the ball home. So that would have been our only shot on goal, but it was Mark Gahey that did it for us. So 8 out of 10 either way. Overall, that brings us to a 5.4 out of 10 for this game. And I think that's a little generous, I think, for this game, because I think that our defense played well, goalkeeping was good, set piece was good, but when you don't have a midfield or you don't have forwards that are doing their job and creating opportunities and just not having any energy or conviction going forward, it leads to a lot of problems. And unfortunately, those problems can cost people their jobs, like Eddie Howe. And that leads us to our next segment about Eddie Howe's possible deeper demise. I know it's a really easy assessment to make, But the decisions made by Eddie Howe make me wonder if he is out of ideas. I talked about this after the Brighton game when we lost 1-0, where I thought it was the beginning of the end for Eddie Howe. And I'm starting to think that this is just another layer deeper after this week. A lot of the things that I was concerned about then have started to rear their ugly head again. Eddie is very, very rigid with his plan. So he has plan A. And if plan A doesn't work, his plan B is plan A more or plan A with more intensity. And in a lot of cases, that doesn't work. There have been instances where we have gotten points from games that we had no business getting them from, like drawing 0-0 to like drawing Man City, beating Arsenal 1-0, beating Chelsea in the cup. It's great to get those results, but on the flip side, if you're drawing 0-0 to Everton, losing 1-0 to a struggling Brighton, the West Ham loss on Monday when they've been leaking goals like crazy, and now this 1-1 draw against Palace and not getting a single shot on goal against a team that's been leaking goals and doesn't have a cohesive back three that is so easy to get out of shape. These are the games that should have never happened. We should have never dropped points in these games. In each of these games, our squad did not demonstrate the ability to make the plays that would have exploited the weaknesses that are very easy to point out. Somehow they weren't exploited. In my eyes, that means one of two things isn't happening. One, Eddie Howe does not see this on game film. If I can point this out after watching condensed highlights of a team's previous 5 matches in an hour's time, what is Eddie looking at? He's watching full matches. What notes is he taking? And how is he applying those going into the next game? It could also be that Eddie isn't drilling the team to exploit those weaknesses. I've seen some Bournemouth supporters in my casual scrolling over the last 2 days, and they've said that Howe did have a tendency to get too rigid with his game plan when he was at Bournemouth, and he didn't like deviating from tactics or lineups that he believed are best. His preferred tactics are very well suited to beating top teams, but I wonder if he doesn't have the tactical skill set to beat teams near or below mid-table to propel us to be the top side that we all know Newcastle can be. If these things aren't happening, it's a very worrying proposition for Newcastle. The stakes are too high to continue slipping down the table, especially at this time of year. I mentioned after that Brighton game that we might have witnessed the beginning of the end of Eddie Howe, and I think that we've gone a little bit further into it. An ability to change tactics and formations based on the opponent you face make for a top-tier Premier League manager that regularly finishes at or top the Premier League table. On the flip side, I have seen a lot of people defending Eddie Howe like crazy, and they're really going after people who think that Eddie Howe should be sacked. Unfortunately, these arguments have all been pretty much the same. Eddie Howe has done a lot of great things for Newcastle United and its fans. He's been the right manager to turn things around at the right time. He brought us to our first cup final in 25 years and the Champions League after 20 years. And it was a much needed breath of fresh air after Mike Ashley slagged off any competition that wasn't the Premier League. These are all great points and a wonderful testament to the accomplishments of Eddie Howe, his coaching staff, and the players involved. Unfortunately, professional sports, regardless of what sport you're playing, they all have a very short memory. You're only as good as your last match or your last run of form. Right now, Eddie Howe has not been able to get the best out of a very talented group of individuals against teams that have no business getting results against us. I've always liked Eddie Howe. I've really admired what he's done. I really think that he has done a great thing for Newcastle United in the turnaround that he's done. But after this last week and the other poor performances prior to that, at the same time, I have to look at things at a broader perspective. Yes, we've knocked off some top teams, but at the same time, we haven't beaten teams that we should beat. And if you're not beating the teams that you should beat, it doesn't matter how good these one-off, beat the big team results are. I'm starting to believe for the reasons like 0-0 draw to Everton, 1-0 loss to Brighton, the 1-0 West Ham loss on Monday, and the 1-1 draw against Palace. Those type of matches make me think that he's not the best person to lead this team going forward. The absolute latest I think this decision should be made by is the Carabao Cup tie against Brentford. Even with a win on Wednesday against the current league leaders Liverpool, a loss to Brentford in either match, a disappointing result against Leicester could spell the end of Eddie Howe. If this path is taken, it gives the new manager a few games to assess the squad and possibly offer some suggestions for 1 or 2 transfers that could bolster the squad in the January window. If this path is not taken, I think you have to ride out the season and hope for the best. It's rare when a late managerial change make a difference in the team's trajectory in the table, and I don't think the board want to put themselves in a position to make a tougher decision in February, March than the current decision they face. So what do you think? Do you think Eddie Howe deserves another chance to turn things around and bring us back to glory? Or do you think along the lines that I do, where a managerial change is necessary to get the best out of this team? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll be happy to engage in that conversation with all of you. I think it's going to be a good one. Later this week, we'll be talking about the Liverpool game on Wednesday, previewing the match against Brentford on Friday. Until next time, this is Adam Snyder saying, "Ahoy the lads." Bye for now.